What's going on, everybody? We got another short Saturday slate, but it's kind of a wild one. Excited to break it all down with you, Glock. And it feels like I haven't been on the show with you in at least a couple weeks. We had like the weird two-gamer that started at like 4 o'clock the other week Central, and then I had a bachelor party a couple weeks ago. So it feels like it's been a while. How you doing, man?
Doing good, doing good. Yeah, it's been a while, and I think it's the last Saturday show, well, non-playoff show of the year. So excited to break this down, with you. Obviously, maybe the last one, maybe not. I don't know if we'll be back on for playoffs or not, but if it is, it'll be fun. Otherwise, it's been a fun year, of course, Bobby. And yeah, excited to break this late NBA year. What do you got? April NBA DFS, you know, down with you. I mean, this is crazy. Before the Memphis news, obviously the slate was kind of looking a little ugly, and it was more concentrated towards the game that I didn't really like, which was Brooklyn Detroit. But now that we have Memphis full aboard the tank station, we're gonna have a lot of plays that come from that game. So yeah, excited to break it down with you and get your thoughts. And I obviously have my thoughts as well. So should be a fun one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you're watching this show, this is like a peak April NBA DFS slate. So, if you're a real degenerate like Glock and I, make sure you guys hit the like button. And if you're not an RPS subscriber, we'll still be covering NBA all the way through the playoffs. I know we're going to definitely have all of that stuff dialed in. In years past, we've had a ton of success in the playoffs with more dialed in rotations. I think it kind of allows one of the things that we're really good at, more so like the game theory or just projecting how the game's going to play out and that kind of thing, like those types of stands, I feel like is especially helpful come playoff time.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of people that obviously don't watch the games and play DFS. I think one of the advantages here at RPS is we have a lot of people that actually do watch the games, including the regular season. So we just carry that knowledge into the postseason, and obviously, like you said, game theory, baby. So yeah, it should be fun, man. The playoffs are gonna be fun. I mean, I think especially in the Western Conference, like, man, I think these Western Conference teams have been playing meaningful games, whether people like to say it or not, for like the past few weeks at the very least. I know my Mavericks have at least, and it's been very intense. I was at the game last night. Luckily, got the win there, without Luca. But every game matters right now in the Western Conference. If you look at the 4 through 10 seeds, like they're neck and neck for the most part. 2 games of separation, and one losing streak of 2 or 3 games can bump you down from an actual playoff spot to the play-in. So every game matters, no matter what the haters like to say about regular season NBA DFS, except for a few teams on this slate. So we'll break it down. But yeah, excited for the playoffs for sure. Shout out to Desmond for watching. OS, shout out to you as well. OS says I'm not getting anyone from the Pistons game. Yeah, I mean, you're going to get Memphis littered throughout your lineup. Obviously, we'll get into that. But before the Memphis news, you were actually getting, quite a bit of Detroit just because of the Cade Cunningham news. So, yeah, just something to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. Well, we'll talk through some of the general lineup construction stuff throughout the show too. There's definitely a few interesting things, especially like position eligibility on the Memphis side of things, and on FanDuel if you play over there, being limited only 4 guys per team. You got to make some tougher choices on FanDuel as far as like which guys from Memphis you want to play, and you got some tough decisions on DraftKings too, with how many guys on that team are point guard and center eligible. So we'll get into the games themselves. We'll start off with the Pistons and Nets game. 214.5 total in this one. Brooklyn's 10.5 point favorites at home. Detroit side of things, Jalen Duren was a late add to the injury report. It's questionable. I think he's going to sit. I think we're probably going to see James Wiseman start, but that's the first game, so we'll obviously have the news by then. Evan Fournier is out, like you mentioned. Cade Cunningham's out. Quentin Grimes ruled out for the rest of the season. Fontecchio's out. Stewart, Thompson remain out. So a bunch of dudes out for the Pistons. Monty's rotations have not been the most favorable lately with how many guys he's playing, and obviously the Pistons have nothing to play for at this point. So I think it was OS and chat mentioned not getting anyone from this game. Like I don't think that's crazy, especially with like the Nuggets news that hit a little bit later on. So it's definitely going to be an interesting one to break down. Then on the net side of things, injury news real quick. Cam Johnson's out, Dennis Smith Jr.'s out, and obviously Ben Simmons remains out for the season. He's got to be setting some records too with the amount that he's getting paid on an actual per minute basis and how much he's actually playing. So kind of throw a little jab in at Ben Simmons there, but let's break down the Pistons side first. I think the Pistons side looks a little better than the Brooklyn side, but maybe you feel otherwise. How do you feel about the Pistons side, Buck?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel indifferent about this side because I mean, you just look at it from like last night's game. They were, apart from the first half, Detroit was getting kind of mollywopped by the Memphis Grizz last night. But, in the second half, they played it pretty close. And even in that, case, you saw a 12-man rotation. Well, it was about like 10 for the most part. And then in blowout, Fournier and Boheim kind of mixed in. But only one guy played north of 30 minutes, and that was Jaden Ivey. Um, and really, my assumption is because he was hot. Like he shot 10 for 15, had 31 raw. But I mean, we've seen Monty get away from Jaden Ivey so easily throughout the season, I feel like. So obviously, to me, Ivy feels like the best play from the Detroit side. But, I mentioned the playbook. Like, I think each one of these guys carries risk. Jalen Duren, like, I don't know why he's not playing 30 plus just to finish out the season and develop. Like, it makes no sense that he's getting in the mid 20s minutes. I mean, sure, maybe he's injury prone and whatnot, but like these young guys, like I feel like you should be developing. Like, obviously you don't want to get them hurt for next year, but I mean, is Detroit really going to be, competing for anything really? I don't know. I'd rather just have my young guys develop. Um, but yeah, so in regards to DFS, like I don't know. I think I like the Brooklyn side more, but I think both sides carry risk. Really, I think my favorite play on Detroit might be James Wiseman if Jalen Duren is ruled out. However, the difficulty is that he's center only, and the plays that we'll talk about later. You have Trey Jameson from Memphis who's center only, and then obviously you have Nikola Jokic who's center only. Um, so that's going to be a decision point you're going to have to make. Like, I think I do like James Wiseman, but you're going to get a lot of teams with Jemison with the salary savings and then Nikola Jokic. So that's your center and util spot locked up right away. So I will be thinking like if Duren is out, maybe playing James Wiseman over Jamison will be something I have in mind, just because we've seen upside from Wiseman before. I forget which game it was, but he got like the late start, and I think he put up like 50 plus fantasy. 39. And he played 37 minutes. And the point being, like, I don't think Detroit has that much center depth behind him. I mean, Taj Gibson, like, are they really gonna, let Taj Gibson play a lot of minutes? I don't know. I feel like if Duren is out, Wiseman really has like the reins to just play as much as possible. So I would like him the most, but Duren has to be out, of course. And then probably if I had to rank it, it would be Ivy, Sasser, and then Flynn. Sasser's been pretty disappointing as of late. He's been the guy that everyone's kind of been expecting to like step up ever since Cade. Anytime Cade is out, but he kind of really hasn't been doing much. So I don't know. I don't really love this side. I think it's more based on injury for me, and it'd be more like Wiseman. Obviously if Duren is out. So I would say Wiseman, Ivy, Sasser, and Flynn are my favorite from Detroit, but probably max one for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not playing a ton of teams, I don't think that's crazy. I mean, Metu will probably mix in a little bit at center.
True,
Um,
true, yeah.
and, and I know I think he did get signed for the rest of the season, but I don't know. If Steve Boynton was in chat, there's no way Steve's here, but he'd be able to pronounce him from being a college guy. But Ebuaman?
Yeah,
Ebuan?
Tosan, Tosan, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I should have just said the first name, but I went for it and butchered it still. Uh, I mean, could still see like I mean, I think worst case scenario, you're getting high 20s a minutes from Wiseman with how effective he is on a fantasy point per minute. He could still pay off that tag. Honestly, the biggest knock on him is because again, I'm going under the assumption that Duran's out. Like, what's the point in downgrading him midday at this point in the season with nothing to play for? Like, I just think that he's not going to play. But it's just how many center options you have. I mean, again, not to get too far ahead, but I mean, you could see Embiid sit. You could have Paul Reed starting. Mo Bamba's also questionable for Philly. So you could have Reed as like the only center for Philly. You also have both Brandon Clark questionable, and then like you mentioned, Jameson potentially playing 35 plus minutes, cheap for Memphis. You've got Jokic as far as just needing to spend your salary somewhere with Murray or Reggie Jackson questionable, Aaron Gordon questionable. Like it's just that's the hardest thing about clicking Wiseman's name, honestly, is just because of the position. But I'll still want to have at least a little bit of him. And I'd agree with you that Flynn, Ivy, Sasser, and Wiseman, assuming Durant's out, are the most appealing names. I don't trust the minutes at all with Ivy, but he played well last time. And there's so many good point guards. Since he's shooting guard eligible, that helps both him and Sasser. I like Flynn, don't get me wrong, and I think that he's a really good low owned play. Like all things considered, it's a 3 game slate. He's projected to be between 10 and 15% owned. I think that makes him a strong GPP play. But there's just so many good point guards. I mean, there's 3 good point guards on Memphis alone. Like it's just tough to fit him in because of his position.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we'll break down Brooklyn, but I don't think you want to get too crazy in this game. I think the contrarian thing would be to kind of load up on this game, just two really bad teams going at it. But obviously you have the huge pending news in Denver, and then Memphis. I mean, you still have 2 Q tags on Memphis with Luke Kennard questionable and Brandon Clark questionable, so they could be even thinner. So yeah,
Yeah, they could have like 7 guys, or like watch news too. They could just have someone active for the sake of
exactly,
just still playing the game. And I mean, if it's a
exactly.
7 man rotation, like
And it
that,
easily could
that's
be
just
Luke Kennard.
tough.
Like they could say he's active and he doesn't play a single bit. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm not going to trust Kennard at all. I mean,
for
especially if he's
sure.
not starting. If he's not starting, you should just X him out of your player pool. If you're 150.
For sure, for sure. And yeah, like we'll get into that game. Obviously, we're kind of skipping ahead, but it's like you got to pay attention to the starting lineups. Like obviously, I think the 5 starters for Memphis are going to be like the guys you want to key in on and hone in on. Um, and then anyone that isn't announced a starter, like definitely has some risk. Like especially a Brandon Clark, especially a Luke Kennard, who are coming in as Q tags as of now. So, um, and then Jake Laravia is doubtful, obviously, and Lamar Stevens is doubtful. Like if you see one of those dudes, end up being quote unquote active, but they're coming off the bench, I would tread carefully for sure.
Yeah, 100%. How about the Brooklyn side? The way that I look at Brooklyn is more so like at least I was looking at them earlier in the day. Now that we've got some of this additional injury news, is just I've got to spend my money somewhere, and Cam Thomas like fills the shooting guard spot and helps me spend my money. And it's a good matchup for him against Detroit. But I'm not dying to get to this team. I'll fill the folks in with a few more thoughts on my side, but I don't think the Brooklyn side looks great to me. What do you think, Luck?
Yeah, I mean, they're projecting well. Obviously, it's against a crappy Detroit team, and the usage is kind of somewhat semi-concentrated with Cam Thomas hogging a lot of it. So obviously he projects the best and would be my favorite play. Mikal Bridges projects well generally most of the time, and today it looks like he's going to be north of 40% owned. I think he's going to be my fade of the night for sure. Any team
How
with
has
Mikal,
Chalk Mikal Bridges gone for us this year? I can't. I'm having
yeah,
a hard time thinking of like any time it's gone well.
you're reminding me because I cannot get this guy right, and I'm gonna fire off the tweet if I fade him and he goes off, I'm gonna be like, yeah, that's 0 for 20 on Mikal Bridges chalk slates this year. But yeah, I'm just gonna continue with the trend. I'm gonna fade him. Like if he beats me, he beats me. 7.1K guard and forward eligibility on DK obviously is nice, but it's Mikal Bridges. I'd rather eat the chalk in Cam Thomas. So good chalk, Cam Thomas for me. Mikal Bridges, bad chalk. Obviously, you can make a case for Nick Claxton. He's a guy that always projects well as well, but they have Daron Sharp. They're mixing in Noah Clowney. Trendon Wofford can play some big minutes for them. So really for me, it's just Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges. Well, no, just Cam Thomas, really. I guess Dennis Schroeder makes sense kind of as a low owned pivot to Cam Thomas. But again, the big thing about Cam Thomas is that he's shooting guard eligible, while Dennis Schroeder's only point guard eligible. You mentioned it. There's a lot of position eligibility problems on the slate with a lot of the Memphis guys being point guard only. So it's just going to automatically funnel you into Cam Thomas in your builds as you need to spend some salary. So yeah, for me, it's Cam Thomas. One guy I did want to look into, Noah Clowney. I think he had a big game recently. Yeah, it was last game. Oh my God, he put up 40 DK in 17 minutes against Indiana. Um, that's pretty wild. I mean, that's really high fantasy point per minute production. But this is a guy that has been playing north of 15 minutes in the last 4 games. 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 22 minutes, 17 minutes. On a slate where the chalk is so concentrated on this Memphis value, Noah Clowney somewhat could be a pivot, at 3.7K. Not saying like maybe it's a single entry play or not, but I think large field, I think you can mix them in because, like we said, like it's late in the year. There's a lot of volatility, like and unknowns. Like Brooklyn played their starters really heavy last game, like 30 minutes plus, but we could easily see Detroit, like a Detroit similar rotation where, these guys just get cut down and then Brooklyn starts looking at these younger guys. So, um, basically, all in all, just to like wrap up this game from my side, it's like I don't think I want to get too crazy from stacking perspective. I think it's literally probably max two, maybe even consider max one, from this spot, and then just wait on the news for later. Personally,
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. One thing I'll note really briefly on the Brooklyn side of things, more of a large field type of play, but I think there is blowout risk in this one. And we've seen Watford's minutes be pretty healthy in like the mid 20s to high 20s, even when Cam Johnson's out. And with Cam Johnson out, I think Watford at like, you know, low teens, maybe in ownership is what he's projecting for right now. But honestly, I think that goes down closer to lock as we get more injury news. I think Watford is like a large field play is definitely interesting.
yeah, good call. Someone in Discord was mentioning like, what happens when Watford minutes when Cam Johnson is out, and you've seen it. I mean, apart from last game, I think that was when Cam Johnson was in against Indiana. The
Yeah, he played
games
like 22
previous,
minutes, I think.
yeah, he played 13. But
Or
before that,
22 last one
yeah.
at
Okay,
Indy.
interesting. Yeah, and then he played 34 minutes, 29 minutes, 24 minutes. So the minutes upside is definitely there for Watford. So yeah, I don't hate that call at all.
Yeah, I think he's a really good large field play, and honestly, I think his ownership gets to single digits closer to lock, and I think he becomes really easy to get overweight on. And that's the type of play you could have seven shot guys, and you've got Watford at 9% owned or something like that, and he goes off for like 41 DK points.
Exactly. Yeah. I had a similar build last night where it was like basically full on chalk, but that Washington center, Tristan Vukcevic, little big Busa, he was only 9% owned. So I had like an Aiton and him mini stack center and util. And then I loaded up on, Kyrie and Dame Lillard, Bobby Portis, all that chalk. And was almost, I was kind of close to shipping, but not really. Kyrie, I feel like didn't do enough. But we take it, and I think I was unique. So with just a 9% owned guy in the hundred. So yeah, just going off your point about that low owned, and then fill it with the chalk basically.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting play. But yeah, it's type of slate where you can't fade all the chalk on the slate. You might as well just donate if that's the route that you're going to go. But yeah, I want to try and find some ways to be different, especially in some large field stuff. All right, any other thoughts on this one before we move to Sixers and Grizz?
Nope, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right. Well, I think we've talked about a lot of the guys that are injured already at this point, but I'll run through it for each team real quick before we get into it. Philly's 14.5 point favorites on the road, 212.5 total in this one. Again, honestly, I think that we're going to see at least one of Maxey or Embiid sit. I think if all like Philly was fully healthy and in, I think they'd be closer to like 17, 18 point favorite in this one is my guess. So um, maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. Maxey and Embiid went through a shoot around ahead of this game. But Philly's got to prioritize health. Like Embiid's been playing a fair bit since coming back from his injury. Like it makes no sense to play Embiid against the Grizzlies. Like I think that's just malpractice if they throw him out there. Like there's no reason to throw him out there against the Grizzlies. And Harris participated in shoot around as well. So TBD, we'll see what happens on that news. And then Mo Bamba's also questionable. So, I mean, if you had Mo Bamba and Embiid sit, ton of minutes would go to Paul Reed. And Batum's questionable too. And if he did play, he'd kind of be him or KJ Martin would be like the backup center in that instance. And Grizzlies side of things, um, catch my breath before I go through all the Memphis injuries. But Vince Williams is out. Lamar Stevens doubtful. Yuta Watanabe out. John Conchar is out. Jaron Jackson out. Desmond Bain out. Moravia doubtful. Kennard questionable. Again, we think that he could be active but not play, so we'll definitely make sure he's starting if you consider playing him. Santi Aldama is out, and Brandon Clark is questionable. I lean that Clark does play after sitting out yesterday, but we'll have to wait and see. So, what are your thoughts? We'll start the Philly side of things since Philly would be a little bit quicker in this game.
Yeah, one thing before we hit on this game, I just fell upon. Report: Dorian Finney-Smith's dad will see his son play in person for the first time in his life on Saturday. And if you're not familiar with Dorian Finney-Smith, his dad was has been wrongly incarcerated, and I think like Mark Cuban and some of the higher ups in the Mavs like helped to get him out of jail. So yeah, I mean, obviously Dorian Finney-Smith is never a sexy DFS play, but if you're in the narrative street, that's quite the narrative. And obviously if Kevin Ollie, who's the current coach of the Brooklyn Nets, has any awareness, then maybe he'll secure Dorian Finney-Smith's minutes and just let him show out in front of his dad, whatever that means from a Dorian Finney-Smith perspective. So yeah, I just want to throw that little narrative out there because I know we like narratives here.
I mean, I think that this is the most excited I've ever been to play Dorian Finney-Smith. This is with this narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm never excited to click on Dorian Finney-Smith, even when he was on the Mavs. But yeah, I mean, hey, this tweet's from an hour ago, Jake. But I mean, if I didn't see it and it's old news and whatever, but today will be the first game apparently. So technically, it's not old because it hasn't happened yet, right? So yeah, I mean, yeah, you want me to go ahead and break Philly down or what?
Yeah, jump into the Philly side of things. What was I going to say? But that's an elite little narrative plug.
He's gonna go off. Think you didn't know? Yeah. See, I mean, maybe Jake Swells knew, but none of us knew. So it's good news new news for all of us. But yeah, I mean, I really didn't think about Philly how you did, like with them potentially sitting. I mean, obviously you make great points about, why would they play? I think, to play devil's advocate, like Joel Embiid obviously is just coming back from injury and, just to get him ramped up for the playoffs, like, maybe get him a little soft matchup where he can get what he wants, get to his spots, produce a little bit, and then blow him out and chill a little bit. So obviously, if Embiid does play, I think he's the pivot to Jokic on the slate. Obviously, it doesn't feel the greatest, but I mean, both the spreads are considerably wide. I mean, Denver's favored by 11.5, Philly's 14.5 points. So I mean, it really comes down to, can the game stay close and how much can my stud center do? And I think Joel Embiid is going to be way less owned than Jokic, obviously, and you get the correlation. So if somehow the game stays close and you have a bunch of Memphis dudes and Joel Embiid, just goes off in his low 30s minutes or whatever, I think that's great. But obviously he has to be in. So I like how you broke it down. Obviously Paul Reed becomes a good play if Embiid misses. Mo Bamba's also questionable. So really Nick Nurse can't really screw Paul Reed over at the center spot. At least from what we think right now. I mean, he seems to find a way somehow. Like maybe he'll play like Tobias at the 5 or something like that we don't expect. But Paul Reed does look good if Embiid and Mo Bamba are out, obviously. If Tyrese Maxey's out, you're going to get more Kyle Lowry usage, Buddy Hield, Campaign, Kelly Oubre. I mean, it's kind of tough to break down not knowing the injury, but obviously we'll be in the Discord and we'll prioritize all the plays for you guys. So if you're not in there, go ahead and get in there. But yeah, I mean, it's all based on news, right? Because we saw last game, Tobias Harris missed and Maxey and Embiid played and they both went off. So it's really just a TBD situation for me. And I don't know, I think you laid it out nicely where, you gave the priority plays if certain players miss. So I don't think I want to repeat that.
Yeah, I really don't have anything else to add. If guys are out, some of these plays look more interesting. If everyone's in, I mean, I don't know. Like, it's almost a 15 point spread in this one. You got to spend your money somewhere, and like you can make the case. I mean, if I'm spending up on anyone on Philly, if everyone's all in, it's Maxi probably. But again, point guard eligible. There's so many good point guards on the slate. It's just so hard to fit someone like him in your lineup. So I'm not very interested in Philly unless injury news breaks right. How about the Memphis side of things?
Yeah, I mean, this will be the bread and butter of the slate. The question is like, how many Grizz is too many? And man, like like we said earlier, it's like we still have Brandon Clark questionable and Luke Kennard questionable. With them projected in, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys projected with them in. And like you said, like one of these guys could easily be active and not play really. So that would just increase the minutes on all these guys even further and increase their fantasy production. Um, I think if I were to rank it, I think Trey Jameson would be my favorite. Last night he absolutely went off. I think he's just gonna keep that train rolling. His minutes are secure. Behind that, I like Jordan Goodwin, and then this Malzohina Pereira guy sounds like MMA. I joked about it in my tweet about the playbook, but it sounds like an MMA fighter. His minutes should be even more secure now with Jake LaRavia out of the mix. Um, and yeah, I mean, Brandon Clark projects well. It's really hard to say because we don't have the starting lineup. Um, I really think like GG Jackson, what was interesting from last night, I don't think he played a fourth quarter minute. Um, which is interesting because that may like give us a sign that maybe they want to keep him healthy for next year, like in that they see him as like a key rotation piece for them. And if that's the case, like, he's projected to be one of the highest owned guys, obviously for Memphis, because one, he's one of the more known dudes this year from a fantasy perspective. And he's like essentially the alpha of this team. Like, if you think about it, it's just if he doesn't play in the fourth, then you're not going to love that as a GG Jackson owner in DFS. So I may consider pivots away from him. Obviously, I think if he does get his regular allotment of minutes, he's going to be a great play and can smash. But similarly to last night, I actually didn't play him last night. Ended up pretty well. I just played like the cheapies, like Laravia, Goodwin, and then Jameson, and ended out pretty well. So I might do the same thing here and focus like that mid tier in a Denver or like a Brooklyn and like a Cam Thomas. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you could really go wrong here with Memphis. It's just you're gonna have to get exposure here because of the rotation that they'll have and the injury situation they have. It's just I would probably make a case for all 5 starters, and then based on whoever comes off the bench, then that would be kind of who I rule out maybe. But like last night, Lamar Stevens like smashed off the bench. I think he actually closed over GG Jackson. So in this case, we won't have GG Jackson or we won't have Lamar Stevens. So that'll just secure more minutes for someone else. But like I said, it's hard to know without having a starting lineup basically, and then obviously Brandon Clark and Luke Kennard are still questionable. So um, all in all, Memphis plays really, really strong. You're going to want exposure here. I think for me, it'll be max 4. I don't think I want 5 personally. But yeah, curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm trending away from GG Jackson a little bit for the like same reasons that you mentioned. I mean, there's less guys to play power forward on the slate, but I mean, it seems like yeah, Memphis doesn't want to run him into the ground. Like I'll still have exposure to him, and like even if you tell me he only plays 30 minutes, he's still a pretty good. He's still going to be a good play, like in a vacuum. But I do think that one of the ways that you potentially do get different on the slate is fading uh, one of or both of Gigi Jackson and Pereira. I've been calling him in my head at least Me Too Pereira, just because I miss my guy that's on the live tour.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, I think it's very well possible that he plays high 20s, low 30s in minutes, and he's not a guy that you absolutely have to have. And it makes, again, a play like Trent and Watford look that much more interesting because there's not like an insane amount of power forward plays on the slate. I think majority of folks are going to put one of those two in their power forward spot. But I think that going with him or potentially spending up on the one game that looks most likely to stay close with like MPJ or Jalen Johnson is definitely an interesting play as well. So my priority is similar to you. It's the 2 point guards, Jordan Goodwin and Scottie Pippen Jr. and then Trey Jameson and Pereira. Those would be the main 4 Memphis guys that I would prioritize. Simpson's gonna have to play a ton of minutes. He's super cheap. He certainly looks good at 3.4K. It's just a matter of only have so many point guard and utility spots, and we want to spend up for Jokic on the slate. At least I do. So it just becomes tough to fit him in there. I like Brandon Clark. He should be lower owned than Jameson. but he's still coming off the Achilles injury, so he's not going to play crazy minutes. So when you start to think of like Brandon Clark's only going to be able to play so many minutes coming off the Achilles injury, still like I don't think they're going to just throw him out there for 40 minutes, and he's a long term piece with this team. I think all of a sudden you've got Clark in like the like mid to high 20s in minutes, and Gigi Jackson at like high 20s, low 30s in minutes. And then all of a sudden, the rest of these guys are playing like every last minute that they can, and like it seems like it's kind of trending towards Kennard's active but doesn't play, and Memphis basically has 7 guys, and you've got like Jamison, Pereira, the 2 guards that I mentioned playing like 40 plus minutes, and Simpson playing like low to mid 30s in minutes is probably how the minutes break down. I know it probably doesn't break down exactly clean and neat and tidy, but that's kind of how I see it playing out.
Who do you think they start if they don't have Kennard? Because I think it's like Gigi, Goodwin, Trey Jameson,
Pippen
Pippen. Yeah, yeah,
and
that's right. And then X. Like, is it gonna be Pereira maybe, or like maybe they start Brandon Clark? Like, because I was
I think
thinking
it's
like,
gonna. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. I'm gonna cut you off.
No, because I was thinking like if Brandon Clark doesn't start, like I don't know how much I can. I don't know if I love the play at 5K. Like obviously yesterday we had Lamar Stevens off the bench, but he was in the 3Ks. Um, and ended up he only played 28 minutes. I mean that's a good amount off the bench, but and he ended up getting a double double. But like 5K off the bench, like it's you're gonna have to be pretty productive. And generally, Brandon Clark is a pretty high fantasy per minute producer when he's out there. But like you said, coming off an Achilles injury, we don't know how
The
much he can
center's so
really
loaded.
play. Like how, like why push him either, right? I think he's like a big part of their team going forward next year. I mean, him with his backup big minutes, like he was great in the playoffs with John Morant in the past. So like, do they really want to push him here? I don't know. I think I would rather lean into guys like Trey Jameson, who really doesn't have a future with this team. Pereira, who really doesn't have a future with this team, in my opinion. Um, even Xavier Simpson, I would probably prefer over Brandon Clark. But yeah, I think who do you think starts in that 5th spot?
I think it's gonna be Pereira, but I wouldn't be shocked to see Clark start either. But I mean, I kind of hope Clark starts just because it would lower Pereira's ownership and probably increase Clark's. But like I want to play mainly the 4 guys that I mentioned that I think are going to play 40 plus minutes. Like that's where I want to prioritize the guys on Memphis personally.
Yeah, I agree with you. And AP 180 says, what do they have to lose by not playing GG 48 minutes? I mean, yeah, I kind of agree with you. And if you played him last night, you're probably tilted, like that he didn't
Yeah,
play at
why did
all in
they?
the
I mean, if
4th.
they've got nothing to lose, like why did they not just do it? They didn't do it last night, and they're
Exactly.
even big, and they got blown up by the Pistons. They're actually
Yeah.
playing like a real NBA team today. Like they're gonna get just mollywopped. Like they're not gonna hang in this game. I don't think.
Like
I mean,
like I said, I think like they actually value GG as like a future piece. He's obviously I don't think he's gonna be a starter next year by any means, but I think he's gonna be a rotation piece that they can lean on for scoring off the bench. So um yeah, I mean, yeah, because if you think about it, their backcourt's John Morant, Marcus Smart, Desmond Bain, and then you have your bigs, right? So I don't think GG Jackson fits in there really as a starter, but as a bench rotation guy, I think he fits perfectly. So I think that's why they're not really focusing in on him to, close out the 4th quarters and stuff like that. It's this late in the season.
yeah, I mean, like in this type of instance, I mean, I don't have insight into exactly what Memphis rotation is going to be, and can't say anything with like you can't really say anything with 100% certainty with these teams that are tanking. We can really just go off of like what they've been doing in these games. So I mean, the fact that they didn't let GG Jackson like close at all in the 4th quarter and get that additional run, like I think that tells us what they plan on doing with these games. Like they keep signing a bunch of 10-day contract guys. Like they're going to run the guys on 10 days that aren't part of the feature into the ground, and let like Gigi and Clark get their reps and play like high 20s to low 30s in minutes. In Gigi's case, probably being the ceiling in this instance.
Yeah, and Gigi
Um,
got his contract. He's on a 3-year, $8.5 million contract. So that just in itself tells you that, they're locking him in for at least 3 years and they're gonna see what he's got
yeah,
next year for sure. So
every real piece on this team isn't playing today. Like that tells you how they're treating this game. Um, And Josh, she says, who do you think plays 40 minutes? I think that Pereira, Jameson, Goodwin, and Scottie Pippen Jr. all play 40 plus minutes in this one. I think low 30s for Simpson and Gigi Jackson, maybe even high 20s for Gigi, but probably like 31, 32 minutes. And I would say that Clark probably plays somewhere in the ballpark of like 25 to 29 minutes would be like the range that I would project.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. I agree. And
but
Kennard's a
just
fade
my
for
take.
me, just to answer
Yeah,
OS's question. He's the
yeah,
guy I
he
want to
can't
play the
play
least.
unless he starts. If he's not starting, like we've seen teams do this. We saw this more during like the COVID days when people would have like a ton of dudes out and like they would just have people active so that they could still have the game. Because I think the rule was you have to have 8 active dudes or you can't play the game.
Even if he starts, I think he's my least favorite play for Memphis. I just don't think like
Yeah.
there's any reason to push him. I mean, obviously he can get hot from three if he starts and maybe crush his tag in like the high 20s a minutes. I think he'll play, but um, I'd be focused on the the cheap younger scrubs here for sure.
No, Luke Kennard's not going to be on the winner. Just X him out. He's not in
There
play.
we go.
Like, just yeah, no. Like, again, even if you told me that Luke Kennard had 30 DK points, like, okay, like, there's gonna be a ton of guys that go at least 5x their salary. Like, he's not gonna be on the winner.
I agree with you. I agree with
Um,
you.
so all right, this next game's a little bit more interesting. We'll start with injury news on the Atlanta side. Same old on the Atlanta side. Trey remains out. Bay had torn ACL, so he's obviously out. And Okongwu is supposed to be reevaluated here soon. He's going to remain out. So same old on the Hawk side of things. Denver side of things are definitely more interesting. Reggie and Aaron Gordon are both midday downgrades. Reggie for an illness and Aaron Gordon for a foot injury. And I believe he's missed some games for foot injuries recently. And Jamal Murray is questionable with that same knee injury. Jokic is listed as probable. So the way that I'm approaching things on the Denver side, we'll get into the team itself, but I kind of lean that Aaron Gordon sits in this one. I think Gordon sits. I think Murray sits again, and I think there's a decent shot that Reggie Jackson sits, but I don't feel as confident in him. How about you?
Yeah, I didn't have these leans like you, but obviously this is the spot to capitalize on when it comes from a DFS perspective. Like we were talking about before show, but like let's say Aaron Gordon does sit, then obviously you have already a pivot in Peyton Watson at 3.6K, where you can consider pivoting one of those Memphis guys into a Peyton Watson. And then similarly to if Jamal sits, then we're talking about who would and Reggie Jackson. If they're both out, like we're kind of thinking about who plays point guard for Denver. Obviously, Jokic is going to be the guy that kind of runs that ship for sure, but we could see Christian Brown starting and, at 4K, he then becomes another Memphis pivot that you can consider. So it's all really based on when you get the news. Like we don't know if you'll get the news before the Memphis game or after, but obviously if you get the news after the Memphis game locks and, you just kind of take a stand that Reggie and Jamal are out and you play like a Christian Brown instead of Xavier Simpson, you're going to cut your ownership to a very, very low percentage in that pivot. And, a guy like Christian Brown has been very productive this year when he's gotten the chance. So I like that idea a lot. And I think on a short slate like this, where it's only 3 games, this is kind of one of the edges that you can play for, based on when this news comes. Obviously, if this news comes before the Memphis game, then I do think there's a chance that some of that ownership gets spread out. Like maybe Christian Brown isn't 5% owned, but then he becomes like 15% owned, and then some of the Memphis guys get a little less owned. But that's kind of how I would think about this slate, especially like, obviously I use the optimizer to, look at how the teams look, but then I mess around with it like, okay, if I put Peyton Watson here instead of one of these Memphis guys, what does it look like? Can I upgrade anything? Do I have to downgrade anything? Et cetera, et cetera. So obviously this game, Jokic is going to be, the cream of the crop priority spend. Obviously because he's healthy and he's going to be in, but these Q tags and Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, Reggie Jackson are huge when it comes to, a pivot perspective from these chalky Memphis dudes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, let's just start with the Denver side of things. We're kind of already going down the path of Denver. We'll start with the home team in this one. Start with Denver. But yeah, like I said, I think that those guys sit, and I think in the instance that you have I mean, you have Reggie sitting as well, like Peyton Watson, he directly benefits if Aaron Gordon is out, and Christian Braun kind of becomes that likely um, ball handler in that instance if both Reggie and Jamal Murray can't suit up. But we've also seen when Jamal Murray can't suit up that Colin Gillespie has been like having some games where he'll actually have some solid minutes. So, I mean, they could just start Gillespie, and I wouldn't be stunned. I mean, everything's going to run through Jokic for the most part, but he's only point guard eligible. He's min price. I mean, just take a like if you took your favorite build that has potentially like a really cheap point guard in it, and you just throw Colin Gillespie in there, he's going to be like I don't know. Even if we probably won't get the news till closer to that game locking, but he'll be insanely low owned. Like people won't really adjust to it either, just because there's not going to be a lot of pivots or options and Saturday night. But I don't know. I don't think that's a crazy play at all in the main GPP on DraftKings where you're looking to be unique and like play someone like that. Like it's not for sure going to happen, but like that's the type of play that could help you win the slate. Like I think that Gillespie could start if both those guys miss too.
Yeah, I mean, he's not even a guy that has a projection for me right now, so that would just like show you like he'll definitely be low owned. Like, and I think on the weekends, especially, people are more asleep at the wheel and not reacting to news as late. They're just kind of locking into what they had beforehand. So, yeah, obviously, if Gillespie starts, he has to be in your pool, I think, for large field stuff. And, obviously a great pivot to these Memphis dudes.
I mean, even if you're playing 20 teams, like bump his projection up to like 18 or something like that and see if he hits anything. Especially if you got like uniques increased as well. I think that he is a very interesting large field play. I mean, like I said, I think that Gordon's going to sit. So that makes MPJ look a lot more interesting too. So I mean, just from my own perspective, I'm a lot more interested in loading up on the spends in this late game. I was hoping some of these guys are out, so you've got some lower owned value pieces in this game, and you potentially got like spends where the matchup looks way better if you don't have Aaron Gordon in there for the Nuggets and just a more thin team. Where this game's more likely to stay close. Total just, or sorry, the spread just dropped by 1 point, so it's still, it's still 10.5. Denver's 10.5 point favorites at home, but Vegas at least adjusted a little bit to the questionable news where it went a point in the Hawks' favor. So I don't know, man. I think I would rather just on this slate more so lean into the Memphis guys that I'm confident are going to play monster minutes and play more spends in this game, and then potentially get different and some builds in the large field main on DraftKings with a Gillespie or a Watson or Christian Braun.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, I think that's what most people are gonna do. But I mean, I think really tonight's slate is all about timing. I think if you want to play it differently, you're gonna hope this Denver news comes after Memphis locks, and then obviously if it comes before Memphis locks, then it becomes a little bit less interesting of a slate. And one guy we didn't mention on the Denver side is KCP. One like he's never a guy that anyone ever likes to click, but if there's no Jamal, if there's no Reggie Jackson, I mean, this dude's gonna play north of 30 minutes in a close game. We saw it last game. He finally flashed some upside, 31 fantasy points in 38 minutes against the Clippers. And Reggie Jackson, I mean, even if he's in, like, and Jamal's out, Reggie has been playing horribly. And his minutes are not secure whatsoever. So even if he starts, I think I would like him the least of the Denver starters. And just definitely lean more into guys like Christian Braun and KCP for sure. So definitely like the Denver side here. Atlanta's a team that we've always targeted, the entire year from a fantasy perspective. They just bleed fantasy points. And I think this game has potential to play a lot closer than the spread indicates. Atlanta's are the winners of 6 of their last 8. Obviously, they lost their last game to Dallas. Coming into that game, they were playing well, winning 6 of their last 7. So with DeJounte Murray at the head of the snake, they have been playing teams closer and been playing better overall. Obviously, this is a tough task going into Denver, Mile High City. So we'll see what they're really made of here. But I think of all the games where, you want to consider some mini correlation, this game, both teams have something to play for when it comes to a standing perspective. Atlanta can move up. They're only 1 game back of Chicago for the 9 seed in the play-ins. And then obviously Denver is in that, 1 through 3 seed tussle with Minnesota and OKC. So technically, these three teams have something to play for, unlike Detroit, unlike Brooklyn. Memphis has nothing to play for. And Philly technically has something to play for. They can move up to the 7th. They're only 1 game back of Miami. But like I said, it's Memphis. So they can kind of take a more conservative approach here with their studs and maybe just play like one of them. So I think this game is probably my favorite from like a mini correlation perspective. Obviously, we haven't gotten into the Atlanta side yet, but like a Jokic plus a Jalen Johnson, is really interesting to me. And stuff like that, like Jokic, Aaron Gordon, and then Jalen Johnson, something like that. And then mixed in with some Memphis guys. It's definitely a route I will be taking tonight.
Yeah, I agree with all that. To wrap us up here, do you want to break down the Atlanta side? Who do you like best on the Hawks? Who are you getting to besides? I mean, you mentioned Jalen Johnson, but any other thoughts on the Hawks or any other guys you're targeting?
Yeah, I mean, I like the side here. I just think some of the pricing is just a little too rich for my liking, especially with Jalen Johnson in the mix. I think the prices are still being, you know, messed with, because they've been out without Jalen Johnson for some time, and then now he's back in the mix playing well. So I think he's my favorite play out of all Atlanta. Obviously, DeJounte Murray is going to make for a great GPP spend up, but his price just keeps elevating almost near 10K, which is kind of crazy for DeJounte Murray if you think about it. But he has been backing the tag up, and obviously if Denver plays it close, I mean, if Atlanta plays it close, then DeJounte, has to be having at least a decent game. So I think Jalen Johnson and DeJounte Murray are my favorite two plays. Clint Capella projects semi decently, but 6.7K on DK, I think that's a little too rich for my blood for a guy that, never really reaches the 30-minute threshold. DeAndre Hunter, 6K, like that seems like a lot for a catch and shoot guy. Bogey is 7K. That seems a lot too with Jalen Johnson in the mix. Like, I mean, all year when Bogey's been chalk, it feels like Jalen Johnson just soaks all the usage away from him. So I think really it's a two-man show for Atlanta. Jalen Johnson, DeJounte Murray. I think I would consider max one of those two for sure. But I think, from a position standpoint, we mentioned it. There's a ton of point guard only dudes. So it's really going to make DeJounte Murray low owned and tough to fit in. So I think Jalen Johnson, just power forward eligible, he just fits a lot nicer in your builds overall with like your double center builds with Jamison and Jokic. And then obviously your other plays mixed in. So Jalen Johnson for me. And I was considering Bruno Fernando kind of like, if you don't think this game stays close, and, Bruno's a guy that has been a high fantasy per minute producer, historically. But again, he's center only. And it's like, do you want to fade Jokic? Do you want to fade Trey Jamison? Like, I don't know. Those two center plays are tough fades. But I think in large field, you could definitely consider it. So I think Jalen Johnson is my favorite from Atlanta by far. But like I said, DeJounte Murray, very interesting point guard only option. If you like can find a way to fit him in, obviously near that 10K price tag.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely find ways to fit him in too if you mix in like a low owned like cheap Christian Brown at shooting guard. Like there's some interesting ways that you could make it work. I think the idea of I don't think a ton of people will probably do this, but if you can do Jalen Johnson, DeJounte Murray, and Jokic, and then find like cheap pieces to mix in. Like you could mix in, Metu or Watford, Peyton Watson, Brown. Like there's some guys that we've mentioned that should be, at least at this point in the day, more off the radar for value pieces. I think that's a very interesting approach. And yeah, I mean, just center's too good. Like I'm not super interested in Fernando and Capella. The only way I'd really get exposure to them was if I were MMEing. I guess still don't think I even get to like really any of them, if any of them at all, in 20 with how good some of these center plays are. It's mainly just Jalen Johnson and DeJounte Murray for me are my main interest points on the Hawks, and I think they're both really good plays. They'll both get a good amount of ownership. I definitely think that Bogdanovich takes a bit of a hit with Jalen Johnson coming back and just doing more playmaking and taking on some additional usage. So those would be the main two priority plays for the Hawks for me. So I mean that's 3 games in the books. You want to hit folks with play of the day before we get out of here?
Yeah, I'll let you give yours first because we may be on the same thing, and I don't want to give the same thing as you. So you go for yours, and then I'll give mine.
All right, I'm gonna go with Trendon Watford as my play of the day. I think with Cam Johnson out, the potential blowout spot against the Pistons here, I just think he's a really interesting play at that 4.6K price tag on DraftKings. I think he's on play on FanDuel too. I think he probably plays closer to high 20s in minutes in this one, and he's a pretty effective fantasy producer. So if he's going to be around a fantasy point per minute, or maybe even a little bit above that against the Pistons, you tell me that I'm going to get him potentially at low ownership. I think again right now, I think I've been seeing like mid teens in ownership on him right now. But like if Duren is officially out and Metu starts getting ownership, he could be single digits closer to lock. I'm seeing 10% ownership on him right now. So give me Trendon Watford low and really like that play.
Nice, nice. I like that. Um, I'm gonna give more of like a duo, like one or the other, and they come from Denver. Like I said, it's like obviously Memphis projects really well. You have guys like Xavier Simpson, 3.4K, point guard only. Um, Jordan Goodwin, Brandon Clark, Trey Jameson, Pereira, obviously. So I'm gonna try to find a pivot that will be lower owned that you can consider, and that'll be based on the Denver news. And so I will say my play of the day is either going to be Peyton Watson or Christian Brown. And obviously that's dependent on, you know, Christian Brown is dependent on Jamal Murray and Reggie Jackson. I think if Jamal is out, I think you can play Christian Brown whether or not Reggie is in or out. I think he would make for a nice pivot to a guy like Xavier Simpson. Obviously, you have to find a little bit extra salary, but I think that ownership is going to be, at a spot where you kind of do want to be able to make the pivot for it. And the same goes for Peyton Watson if Aaron Gordon is out. 3.6K Peyton Watson, we played him a lot, when he started, and he's treated us pretty well. So um, just keep your eyes out on that news, and that'll be kind of my stance on playing one of those guys instead of a chalky Memphis cheapie, basically. So that's how I will get different tonight.
Yeah, I love the idea. I'm taking shots on some of those Denver guys. So another plug to sign up for RPS if you're not a member right now. Big T's got some Nuggets sources. I know there's been some days where he drops some Nuggets for the RPS members in Discord. So hit up Big T in Discord if you're a member. Ask him what his thoughts are on Denver, and maybe he'll get us the goods, and we'll get a little bit more of a lean on whether those guys play or not outside of just what our speculation is. So if you're not a member, sign up with RPS 15% off your first payment. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we'll be covering NBA all throughout the playoffs. We've done really well these past playoff seasons. I shipped the main one of those slates last year. One I think in total is about 60K. That night was only a three-way chop, which isn't too bad considering it was I think it was a 2 or 3 game slate that night. So yeah, join us for the playoffs, and yeah, hopefully ship the main again either tonight or maybe save that for the playoffs with go with the big bang.
Yeah, we need the bigger prize pools, Bobby. We need the bigger prize pools first. So let's get those back up, and then you can ship.
Okay. Hopefully, one of you guys listening ships tonight, and I'll save my shipper for when it's 100K up top.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So for myself and Glock, good luck on the slate. We'll of course up a little bit closer to lock. Going to be a bunch of news that's going to come still too. So get in the Discord, and we'll keep you guys up to date and all that stuff. Good luck, everyone. Yep.